That was to you, Julie.
Oh.
So whatever, like, are you hitting a timer or?
I'm just gonna watch it.
Oh, you're
Okay,
snapping that means I'm done.
No, I'm giving pre-applause.
All right, go ahead.
Oh, okay. The Threads of Time Part 2, which is just awful. But the night was vast and filled with stars. The extemporanea passed beneath them, its prow causing not a ripple. As they were still in the east, the captain had silenced the motors. Now the sails puffed full despite there being no wind. This was thanks to the myriad webbing lacing them, a little invention of Conrad's. Captain John groaned. Lying awake in his bunk at 4 a.m. was bad enough. Why did he have to make it worse by thinking about Conrad? True, the Inventive, now securely below decks in the engine room, had saved them from the Collective, eventually. But then they would not have needed saving if Conrad had not betrayed them in the first place. The thought lodged in the captain's craw and would not be... stuck in the captain's craw and would not be dislodged. Turning to his side, his gaze fell on the small porthole directly beside his bunk. As luck would have it, at this exact moment, a figure passed by outside. As quietly as was possible, Captain John pushed back his blankets and crept to the door. He pulled it open a crack and peeked out. The figure had gone to the bow and stood there, looking out at the stars. Still silent, the captain pulled the door closed behind him and went to join him. As he came close, the figure sharpened and resolved itself into the familiar one of Hugh. Captain John relaxed a little and came up beside his friend. Can't sleep either, eh? Hugh did not respond, but continued to look out at the stars. His face was set with an odd sort of determination. Good thing Heliotrope fixed the ship, the captain went on. I admit I had my doubts. Conrad did say she could fix anything, but, He trailed off into Hugh's continued silence. The captain began to feel concerned. Not missing a venture already, are you? He looked closely at his friend. It's only been a day since. I think what we just been through would be enough to keep even you happy for at least another hour or two. We must go to Canada. Captain John blinked. Of all the responses he was ready for, that was not one of them. Canada? He was unable to keep the amazement from his voice. Well, but even you can't possibly want that sort of excitement. It isn't healthy. Abruptly, the gentleman turned to face him. The captain took a step back in shock. It was Hugh, all right, but the expression, so resolute, so focused. This was a Hugh he'd never seen. This was a stranger. We must go to Canada. All right? Captain John kept his voice low and steady. Take it easy. You've been through a lot. Maybe you should go back to your room and rest up a little more. Hugh was remarkably swift when he wanted to be. The sword was in his hand, and its point inches from the captain's eyes before the ellipsis was complete, which makes more sense if you're reading it. Change our heading. The gentleman's tone was careful, deliberate, most unlike Hugh. Or I run you through. The captain didn't know what was going on, but he did know he wasn't having any of this nonsense, not after the experience they just had. He folded his arms. Absolutely not. Afraid you'll have to run me through. And I know you won't, so why don't you just... Something stung the side of his neck. He gasped and put a hand to the fresh, long, rather deep scratch. Hugh! That was deliberate. The gentleman moved the sword down toward the captain's heart. The next will be just as deliberate. The captain gaped. Here he'd been foolish enough to go thinking his personal quota of surprises was filled for the rest of the year. Something was seriously off here, and he was about to add to it. Conrad, he yelled. The sword swiped near his upper lip, and he stepped backward hastily. All right, I'm going. He moved back towards the wheel as slowly as possible. Bloody hell, where was the Inventive? Had the roles been switched, Hugh would have been at his side in an instant. He might have known, expecting help from Conrad. Foolish. After all that had happened, all the Inventive had done. Why would he? Conrad's head appeared at the stairs, moving slowly. Captain John let out a relieved breath as he stopped by the wheel. Conrad, there's something wrong with Hugh. I know. Could there possibly be some kind of residual effect from the pendant? The captain continued. Wait. What do you mean you know? The Inventive had stopped by the ship's rail and was leaning against it more heavily than usual. There was one hand clutched to the man's side. A fresh, dark stain seeped from around it. Stabbed me in my sleep. Conrad sounded as if he had expected nothing less. Hugh gave the sword a small but decidedly triumphant flourish. Just enough to keep him out of the way. He's got that right. The Inventive grimaced. although whether this was from the pain of the wound or the pain of admitting Hugh might be right was hard to say. If I move off this rail, I don't think I'll be going very far. In answer to your question is not that... Here he paused as a shudder passed through in a sharp exhale. It's not the cholia. It completely loses power when removed from the wearer. Maybe an effect of the concussion, then? The captain felt he should say something to comfort Conrad, but there didn't seem anything he could say. Hugh threw off the idea. I'm completely healed. Never felt better. He said something similar when that cholia was around your neck. Again the sword swiped at the captain. He gave up arguing. With great reluctance, he placed his hands on the wheel and turned it to the right by approximately 10 degrees. After all the preceding drama, it seemed rather anticlimactic. It's done. We're on course toward Ontario. That will do. The gentleman gave a curt nod. He lowered his weapon. Halfway through the movement, confusion flickered across his face. The sword dropped to the deck with a clatter. I'd say... Captain John took a cautious step forward. Hugh? What happened? His friend blinked. What are we doing on deck? You don't remember? Last thing I knew, I was lying down to sleep in my hammock. Hugh noticed the captain's neck. Say you're hurt. The captain was used to his friend's amazing faculty for forgetting recent occurrences at the drop of a hat, but he'd also always rather suspected it to be purposeful. This time, Hugh seemed genuinely unaware as to what had just taken place. Well, it's just a scratch, luckily. Not so much for Conrad. Conrad? Hugh swiveled, taking in the inventive's unfortunate circumstances. What happened to you? You did. What? The gentleman huffed, with his customary indignation tempered with a tinge of bewilderment. But I didn't. Like hell you didn't. There was nothing bewildered about the inventive's cutting tones. Now they were back on familiar ground. Just like Conrad to blame Hugh for the least little thing. Well, there's no call to be rude about it. If you're recovered from... Captain John cut in. From whatever that was. Now, maybe I can correct our course. He reached for the wheel and was stopped by a length of cold steel. I think not, Captain. Hugh's hand was steady. The calm, satisfied, almost smirk was back. Again, the captain stepped back and lifted his arms. All right. See? Hands off. See that they stay there. The gentleman blinked abruptly. Once more he dropped the sword. But what was I see you're back. This time the captain took a casual sidestep toward the sword, hoping to get to it first. Hugh threw up his hands. What's going on? Isn't that the question of the morning, thought the captain. Aloud he settled for, we are, heading for Canada. Canada? Captain John shrugged. It was your idea. For the first time, Hugh looked shaken. Why on earth would I want to go there? I mean, not that I'm afraid or anything. You'd have to be daft. Wouldn't you just? The gentleman rounded on the inventive. About time someone put him in his place. You know, bleeding slowly to death is no excuse for bad manners. Captain John held up a finger. But he's got a point. Hugh paused. Oh, no, really? Yes, really. Captain John felt weary of a sudden. Hugh, in all our years of friendship, I've never asked you for anything. This wasn't entirely true, but it got the gentleman's attention. You want a favor? He struck a heroic pose. Anything, old friend? The door swung shut with an iron clatter, locking Hugh, weaponless, securely in the brig. The gentleman folded his arms with a scowl. This isn't quite what I had in mind. It's for your protection as much as ours. Captain John gave a reassuring smile. Just until we can figure out what's wrong with you. There's nothing wrong with me. As you say, the captain nodded. I'll just go change our heading then. Well-manicured fingers thrust through the bars, vainly attempting to grab at the captain. You will do so with your last breath. Captain John sighed. That's what I thought. What's what you thought? Never mind. The captain was already heading up the stairs. I'll be back to check on you later. The gentleman watched him go, a trifle worriedly. Heading for Canada. Never thought he'd see the day. Hopefully Captain John would come to his senses soon enough. He couldn't possibly want that sort of excitement. It wasn't healthy. The sight above decks was no more encouraging than it had been a few minutes ago. Conrad was still in the same spot, at the rail. He had slid down to a sitting position, which seemed to have helped slightly. At the very least, his breathing was a little bit less ragged, and there seemed a bit more color to his face. I presume we'll change course now. The words were staccato in one breath. The inventor was clearly concentrating. Captain John paused. Not just yet. What? Conrad sat up a little, then winced and sank back again. You don't mean you're purposely heading us toward Canada? The captain nodded, not quite able to believe it himself. I mean just that. Oh, God. Conrad's mouth opened and closed weakly a moment. I'm going to die. Look, you're not... The captain started to reassure him, then stopped. He was a truthful enough man. Well, just don't worry about it. Oh, don't worry. Sarcasm filled the inventive's tone. Right. Worrying is definitely one of the things I won't do in my... He checked the wound at his side. 3 hours or so of consciousness left? 3 hours? You're an expert on mortal injuries now? I know my stab wounds. Something in the inventive's voice brought the captain up short a moment. But there was nothing to worry about, he hoped. Maybe this was as stupid a move as he suspected. Canada. They'd all heard the stories. But with a wounded man aboard, well, they couldn't just go marching into a hospital in the East. For one thing, medicine, as with so many things in the East, was fairly useless without any sort of technology to help it out. Even a hangnail would be certain to be met with a quack armed with little more than an enthusiastic bone saw. As for the second thing,